Hello, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining this webinar today on females and Fragile X syndrome with Dr. Marcia Braden. My name is Liz Jewell, and I work as the Family Support Counsellor with Fragile X Association Australia. We should firstly acknowledge and thank our sponsor, Zynerba Pharmaceuticals, for the educational grant that's made this webinar possible for us today. Please make yourselves comfortable, as we're fortunate to have Marcia present for an hour and 20 minutes today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and the land which you are situated, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Dr. Marcia Braden is a licensed psychologist with a clinical practice specialising in children and adolescents. She is a former teacher with experience teaching general and special education. She has written and published numerous articles related to education and behaviour management strategies, techniques, and interventions. Dr. Braden frequently consults with parents, therapists, educators, and medical staff about effective treatments. Respected for her work internationally, she has presented at numerous conferences and workshops about Fragile X syndrome, autism, and other related disorders. We feel extremely fortunate to have Marcia present today on females and Fragile X syndrome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's so good to be back with my friends in Australia and New Zealand and talking again about females with Fragile X. I'm hoping today I can share more strategies with you rather than research, and look at ways that you can help support individuals who have Fragile X syndrome and are females. Just want to show you a couple of my good friends with Fragile X syndrome, and it's so fun to be able to share with you these individuals. The ones on the left are sisters, and then we have a mother and a daughter. So females with Fragile X syndrome are a big part of my life and what I do in my career. I just want to share a little bit about females with Fragile X syndrome and that what they've inspired me to be. I know a lot about them, but they've really taught me a lot too. And part of what they've taught me is that they work so incredibly hard to overcome their deficits. What I've learned from them is that they persevere, and no matter how high the mountain, they climb and they continue with determination. And when they become discouraged, they rewind and move forward. And I've seen this so many times with these individuals with Fragile X. They inspire me because they continue to laugh and they enjoy life, even when they struggle. They are my heroes. I want to talk about the variability with females with Fragile X syndrome. And I often get the question asked, why is one of my daughters pretty high functioning, seems to cope pretty well, and then I have one that struggles all the time? This is an important question to ask and answer. The functioning is not correlated with the CGG repeats, and that simply means, I know we've got some genetic students in our audience. What that means is that CGG is a nucleotide that's on the DNA. So it's not correlated with the number, because we see a lot of times in our lab results so many CGG repeats. And some females with Fragile X who have a full mutation really function in the normal range, where even some pre-mutation females have learning disabilities. So that variability is really difficult to understand. I've tried to put a slide or two together to kind of explain to you about this phenomenon. And what we call it is inactivation. So X inactivation. We know that there is this protein that is on the X chromosome. Now, females do have two X chromosomes, as you all know. One would have a normal and one would have a full mutation gene, and that's in people who have Fragile X syndrome who are females. Now, this is kind of confusing. To me, it's counterintuitive. One active, meaning unmethylated. So in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if it's active, it has to make protein. But it means it's active for Fragile X, and it doesn't make protein. And one that's inactive, that's methylated and does make protein. So again, kind of look at it in a different sort of way when you're sorting this all out. So these cells with normal gene on the active X produce the protein, and cells with full mutation on the active X have no protein. And the more cells with the protein, the normal active, the higher the functioning. Let me give it to you a little bit differently. So let me explain a little bit more about this X inactivation. The X inactivation is really random, and it's really hard to predict what percent and which neurons are going to have the chromosomes with the normal gene activated to make the protein, and how many have the chromosome with the mutated gene and activated and not making the protein. It's usually about 50%. So again, when we look at someone with the full mutation, we look at about 50% producing the protein and 50% not. But at times, this gets skewed. And the female may actually have 20% of her neurons with the chromosome that has the mutated gene and doesn't make the protein, and 80% with normal gene activation and does make the protein. So you see, that's why it's so different in many cases, and there is no way to predict that. If we look at blood testing, and that can be done, sometimes the blood testing will predict, but it makes a rough correlation. And we can't particularly say, go get a blood test and it'll tell you how many of your cells are inactive and how many are activated. And that will predict the outcome. I've even had people who are pregnant who are going for those blood tests to determine whether or not they're going to keep the pregnancy if it's a girl. I think that's a risk. I think we don't know enough about that yet, and I think we need to be careful when we use the blood test as a way to predict how affected the female will be. So let's begin with some of the cognition and some of the things that are really important, because we know that the girls that we deal with, that we test, that we work with, their IQs really are not a good predictor of the outcome. And that's been proven over and over again, that a score really does not put a ceiling on an individual with Fragile X, nor the girls with Fragile X. Let's talk about that a minute. We know that there are major learning issues with girls that have Fragile X. For example, they have trouble processing information. They do it differently than we do. They don't do it sequentially. They have a stronger verbal memory, and they have poor performance on their digit span, which means memory, just remembering digits. And that has to do with their inattention, their verbal learning, and working memory. So again, those are things that are difficult for them. And we're going to talk about exactly how that then works into their lives at school, their lives at work, and in relationships. They also have deficits in spatial memory, which does cause them some problems getting lost, even navigating when they're driving. And of course, now we have GPSs on our phones. That was the best invention, I was told by one of my girls with Fragile X, because she can now navigate and not have to be on the phone with her mom all the time, explaining where she is and what the street signs say to get around. And we all know that the girls pretty much, I think across the board, have issues with arithmetic, maths. So let's talk about the educational strategies. We have lots of ways that we've used now and developed that really are very helpful for this population. And that's really nice, because we don't have to say, well, you have trouble with math, so we're going to skip a bunch of math. No, that isn't the case. We have ways to sort of go around it, because these girls, these females, these adult women have lots of good strengths. They really are wonderful when we think about the ways that they can sort of regroup. And remember my first slide and me being excited about telling you things that are going on with these individuals. They have ways to cope, and they have ways to work around these problems. So let's look at this. How can we set something up so that we don't have so much visual disorganization? We're going to limit the amount to be copied from a printed to a written material. We're going to specify visually presented materials to eliminate clutter, excessive stimulating format. That means that when they have a worksheet or something to fill out, it's not cluttered with a whole bunch of information, that they can focus on what's important. We're going to provide more visual cues. Color coding is a great way to help them keep organized and not get distracted. And so the color code tells them what they do first, and then the next color says what to do next. Sometimes we number things. Sometimes we use arrows, and different ways to organize those written tasks. We want to give specific concrete cues when we give oral directions. That is so important, because it really helps them organize the thoughts and what we want from them. And the other piece is there's additional time for writing assignments, for example, or for maybe doing some math work. So again, giving them additional time is extremely important. Let's look at some educational strategies again. We know that math computation is static, so it's really not that difficult for them. Now, some people say to me, what? That doesn't make sense. My daughter struggles all the time with math. Well, let's take a look at what math is. Math has lots of different ways of computing and ways of figuring out answers, doesn't it? There is just straight, 6 plus 10 is 16. Okay, that's the static math computation. That is not difficult for them. Word problems and abstractions in math problems are where it gets difficult. And that's basically going beyond just the normal sort of computation that we might be able to do with a calculator, really. The word problems are, you read the word and then you have to figure out what the words tell you, what the function is, what they need to do to find the answer. This gets very difficult for them. And a lot of girls do opt out of higher math classes in high school. They simply go through what's computed, and then the rest of it, they kind of say, okay, I'm done with math. Oftentimes they use patterns and grids to fill a number of equivalents. They love those sort of patterns. They love check marks. They love kind of following a grid. That's something they really enjoy. And actually, a lot of the females with Fragile X as they get older can become accountants because they like putting numbers into certain places, and that works for them. They like patterns, and a lot of times we've used music and rhythm to build that memory, to build memory around those skills. And I always recommend using calculators because really and truly, that's what our world is like now. And when you go to the market, there are so many people there that have their calculators out, figuring out what they can buy and what they can spend and how much money they have. It's very common and it looks very normal. So again, I recommend that. And then we're all now using a lot of credit cards and debit cards, and that's something that's become a tool when we purchase. And that's kind of good news, bad news, because I've had girls with Fragile X have debit cards and they sort of forget to enter certain amounts into their checking account that they've used with their debit card, and oftentimes they're overdrawn. So we have to really watch that as well. We also look at ways that we can use manipulatives to teach concepts and math operations. And those things work really well. It's really important for them to have something tangible to hold on to, because math is such an abstract animal, isn't it? It's just something that is out there that a lot of people say, it eludes me. I don't understand how they come up with these answers because it is abstract. So those visual cues can help reinforce those operations, kind of help them understand what's going on. And as they read a word problem, we can actually talk through what the operation is and what they need to do to get the answer. The auditory distractions is really tough. They often have, ADHD, which then causes them to have difficulty when they're doing these problems. So I always tell parents, please get a place established for the homework or for the teaching where there are very few auditory distractions so that they can concentrate on that problem solving. They need really everything that they have to get through math. I like to use diagrams. I like to use lots of illustrations. I like to draw out. So if it's, let's say we're looking at a ratio or we're looking at a percentage, just draw that pie and help them understand those fractions and those percentages of the pie in teaching those concepts. And then again, we just need a lot of repetition and patterning because that's how they learn best. This is some strategies that were developed by one of your local experts, and I will introduce you to her in a moment. Her daughters and she have developed some techniques that work really well to teach money. And you should recognize this money because it's your money. But she's developed a lot of techniques where it's really hands-on and there's active use of information. So they're really involved actively in solving these problems. And they're using, as you can see here, they're using real coins and they're putting things together that would be in their wallet. So it's real life and figuring out, okay, what's the equivalent here? It really is great. And she's developed so many of these great worksheets and ways to teach money and math to her daughters. And let me tell you all about her. Her name is Jennifer Bush, and she's one of your Aussies. And she's your local expert. And I ask for her permission to introduce you, and she will be you to her, and she will be joining me at the national conference here in the United States, where she and I will talk about girls with Fragile X and females with Fragile X. And I'm just so excited to plug her into our system here, because she's going to be a great resource. But you have her there. So I would suggest that you contact her. And here's her contact information. And I'm sure Wendy and Liz can get it to you as well. She's a psychologist, and she's the director of the Mindful Project. And she has developed some wonderful strategies and ways to really make learning so much easier for the females, as well as strategies for any kind of therapy. So again, Jennifer Bush, here's your local expert, and I think you're actually going to be at this webinar. So here you are, everyone. You'll be glad you have her available to you. She's a great resource. One other thing that we do with educational strategies is to use, as we said, real life sort of objects and things that are tangible. It's really interesting how, if you have the opportunity to sort of feel and touch and move things around, that really does resonate in your brain. And you are then remembering, and it's like that aha moment where that's why I do the multiplication, or that's what I need to do first in order to get this answer. I like packaging. I like following directions in terms of putting so many in, adding up so many and putting them into a basket or a plastic bag, using tangibles here to kind of talk about what a cone is and some of the geometric shapes that seem to be eluding individuals with Fragile X, females especially. So let's use those things. Let's use those things that are concrete and can bring really a lot of understanding to these individuals. When we're doing anything that has to do with auditory memory, which is one thing that is very difficult for these girls, and that's why just, math facts, cold math facts without writing them down and understanding and seeing a pattern is so difficult for them. We need to give those directions in a very slow and concrete manner. We know that telling them things does not always register, and there's lots of repetition that's necessary. So again, this is something that you need to remember. That was one of the areas that was studied. That's the research that we've sort of built this particular webinar on, to know that those auditory instructions may elude them. And it's really important to be slow and concrete. And of course, I always say, reinforce it with the visuals. Make sure that what you're talking to them about has a visual there, so that they can have another avenue to sort of understand what you're talking about. They should be close to you. You should ensure their attention and focus and concentration. The girls actually have more issues with inattentiveness than the boys, and that's been studied pretty thoroughly. So again, we want to make sure that they're paying attention to us and they're able to concentrate. The environment has to be void of those distractions. And I like this picture because this little girl is actually doing a really nice job of having a set place for her homework. She's putting on her headsets those are noise canceling headsets. So that does not mean she's listening to music, because again, that would be counter to her being able to attend and focus. And then we want to use those earphones. We want to use carols or certain seating arrangements at school so that they can focus better. I like to vary the presentation. So again, we do something that may be highly auditorily loaded, but then I give them breaks so that they can maybe walk around, get some movement, and come back, because this is really hard for them. Let's talk about executive functioning. That's the real hotbed right now. I think a lot of people are talking more and more about executive functioning, and I've talked to you before about this. It's really the executive director, the CEO of your brain. That's what executive functioning is. That sort of process that puts everything into place, organizes things. We know that in comparison studies with various controls, the performance of women with Fragile X syndrome is the most consistent difference was in executive functioning. That was the area that they really struggle with. And you can see why it's so important to talk about it, because it is in fact a process that really dictates a number of processes that we deal with. They seem consistently low across ages, so it's not just in children, but also in women who are adults. And it's about pragmatics, organizing things, and being able to really connect with a project or something that you need to do. And I've had moms tell me, even as pre-mutation carriers, you know, I have this problem too, because it's really hard for me to finish a project. I have great ideas. I get all of the, like if I'm doing a craft, I get all of the materials lined up. I have everything ready to go. I cannot execute. I cannot begin and finish that organization of that task. And so again, you can imagine, I mean, this is really difficult. Let's talk about work. I mean, getting everything together and executing. And as a matter of fact, sometimes we have difficulty when we ask parents of girls with Fragile X to do certain things, like have homework assignments related to their memory, have homework assignments related to them expressing their feelings. And the mom will say, I completely forgot about it, or I didn't know how to start it, or I just wasn't sure of how to do that. And so again, we have, you know, the generations having issue here with executive functioning. I want to talk a lot about this because I think we need to develop lots of strategies. And those of you at home who don't have to be teachers, but can help your daughters sort of develop this skill, it's really critical. We know that there are some things that get in the way of executive functioning. And one is really poor impulse control and selective attention. And we know that our girls will pay attention and our adult females will pay attention to things that they're interested in. But things that they're not interested in that we need to teach them about is really a struggle. And so we need to do some things to sort of bring them to the forefront in order to be able to learn these things. So they have the attention deficits that interferes with their ability to listen and execute. And this is the other thing that I hear about all the time from parents. They get stuck. They're not flexible. And when they get stuck, they can't think about the problem with great flexibility. So let's talk about real life here. I've had this happen to me many times. When an appointment is changed to a different time, or I need to call one of my adolescents or adults with Fragile X and ask her if she can change her appointment time because I have a conflict or because something came up and there was an emergency, it is so difficult to get them on board to make that change. And they basically say, no, I just can't. And I'll say, okay, let's get your planner out. Let's talk about your diary. Will you tell me what's written in? Well, I don't know. Let's try it again, because they're so stuck and so upset with the change. They are inflexible with even coming up with a different way to solve the problem. And that becomes a major issue. So that's something that I work on, and I'm very concrete about it, because I just go through and say, okay, well, let's look at that. Show it to me on the screen, or bring it in and let's look at it to the office. Those are ways that they have to get through that, because they really do dig in their heels. Here's something that you can do to sort of help with learning in terms of executive functioning deficits. One of the things that's hard for these females is that sequential processing, putting things in order. So even at early age, when you're teaching them to write their name or doing something that seems difficult for them to remember the sequence, this is kind of a neat strategy, which is called backward chaining, where you actually start with the name and they can complete it, or you may do the back part of the name. So you do the X first and they would complete it backwards. So again, this is how they would complete this, and they would want to complete it. So here we have, you know, the A and the L, and they need to complete the end of it. So instead of starting at the beginning and trying to remember the sequence, they can go into this and finish it out so it looks right to them. And that's a really good way, a great strategy to teach spelling words, to teach how to write their name, the sequence of different words. We showed this to you the time before, but some of you weren't on that particular webinar. This is something that we use all the time with individuals to build executive functioning. This is called the Stroop, and that must be the guy that developed this technique, or woman. What we do here is we get them to read this. It goes back into executive functioning. In other words, they're looking at this word that says red, but it's actually purple. So we have introduced something that sort of really confounds this, doesn't it? For them learning to, or actually reading it and executing it quickly. And that's what this is all about. So we try to get them to sort of switch gears, execute quickly, and read just what's there. It's difficult at times because they look at the color and they tend to say that color rather than the actual word or to name it correctly. So we go through this. It's a number of these on a page, and they go quickly through this. And I time them. It's really an exercise to get them to think automatically, that automaticity, but to also execute something that's kind of different or foreign to them. So what is it and why is it such a big deal? Well, often when a female is telling a story, and those of you in the audience, I feel your pain. Sometimes it's painful because we're trying to get information and that story is sort of interrupted by a tangential thought. So they may be talking to you about something that happened, and then there's a word in there that they talk about in their conversation. And that word now gets their attention, and they go down a rabbit trail and they're talking about something unrelated to the story that you want to hear them tell you, especially if it has to do with something that went on at school that might be difficult or some problem that they want to talk to you about. They start the talking about the problem and then they get interrupted by a thought. They also misunderstand information. This is really important because they can really seem to understand us by their nodding, their body language, lots of different things that kind of disguise their confusion to us. They oftentimes will even interject phrases appropriately that they borrowed from another conversation or something they've heard someone say. And so it's kind of like, well, they do understand this. They're using these phrases, they're talking about it appropriately. But once you stop and you ask for information, you ask for understanding, you will actually see how difficult it is for them, that they're distorted in terms of their understanding of what's been said. I've learned this recently with a couple of the clients that I have, the females, adult female clients that I have, where we just get stumped oftentimes, that they've heard things and we think they understand it, and then they go against what they've been taught or what they've heard. And when I've started using this program that has a lot of video modeling in it, and when I'm watching it happen, it's really interesting because I show the video and then I ask questions afterwards about what went on in the video. It's really a great way for me to sort of check for that comprehension. And there's snippets and there's pieces of the video, but there's a lot that's missed. And really the overarching message is missed. And that's really important for us to understand because it causes them a great deal of behavioral confusion and frustration. And then it really does exacerbate problems because they've misunderstood something and we've assumed that they understood it. The other problem is they don't often ask for clarification or help. So this is a young lady who is a young adult with Fragile X, and I want you to listen to her interview with me, just to kind of look at the style, the pattern, that she does get stuck on certain details that really have high emotional content, and she sort of just perseverates. We call it perseveration. It just goes on and on and on. So let's go with this a minute and see what she says.
Inside, I'm a little kid, but I am a 19-year-old, and I like to watch shows like Jay, The Guardian, The West Wing, Seventh Heaven, Everwood.
Things like that.
Things like that.
But then what would be some examples?
Now, let me just interrupt a moment. Do you realize that she would have gone on with that list forever? And I had to get in the middle of it to get her to move on. Okay.
Things that you're not 19-year-old about.
Well, I still like to, watch, cartoons that, are like from the 80s, like the Care Bears, Rainbow Bright, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
So if you said to a friend of yours that was also 19, I like to watch Teenage Mutant Turtles, what would they do?
Oh,
They would
laugh.
probably.
You name it. You name it. They,
That would be embarrassing.
Oh,
So this is really important to talk about because what she first of all did was she was trying to tell me how she may be different than people her age that are typically developing. But in that process, she really explained how that looked because she got on her list and she went on, and then I had to interrupt and say, what else? And then the overarching comment, the overarching message that she was trying to give was, I'm different because of these reasons. And yet we got stuck on basically what she watched on television. So you can see what I'm saying about being sort of unable to be flexible. She had an idea of how she was going to answer my question, and she got stuck there. She couldn't go forward with any other ideas other than what she watches on TV. So again, this is a very good example of what I'm talking about. Let's look at the psychological profile. This has been studied over and over again. Some people say, well, you're quoting some studies that are pretty old. And what really the idea here is to quote these studies because they've been replicated. But again, not a lot has been done after these studies have been done. So, I mean, if we can replicate them, that's fine, but there's no reason to, because these hold up in the test of time. So you can look at the ADHD, that's 35% of the population of the females they studied. Shyness, social anxiety, very common with this group. Anxiety, Ave Lakovich did a nice study in 94 where 40%, and these were pretty big numbers of people that they studied, had the anxiety. And this is the next one that's really important, is the avoidant personality. The majority of girls, females that were studied have avoidant personalities. And some of them have selective mutism. That's less than we would see in the other groupings here as far as the psychological profile goes. But I want you to kind of focus with me on that avoidant personality. There are some people who, the girls are very shy and they have great difficulty talking to you, especially if they don't know you very well. And this little girl, I was doing an assessment in her home in another state, and she'd met me a couple of times, but not really knowing me very well. And I was asking her questions, and finally I decided, because she had talked about it earlier, to go upstairs to her bedroom because she wanted to show me her bedroom. And all of a sudden the floodgates opened. She was able to show me something, to talk about it using drama. And before, she was almost mute. She couldn't answer the question. She was so anxious. So I want to show you what she did here.
Buddy, I'm Lizzie. I just discovered that I always love my room. Sometimes this is where I sleep, and this is where I get my pajamas and my clothes. And that's my radio, where I put my underwear and my socks. And that's my closet getting my dresses. And that is all. Thank you. And one more thing. And these are my toys. And
well, I would like you to talk about your mural.
My mural?
On your wall.
Oh, my mural is called a mirror with ballet slippers on each side. And these are my ballerinas.
Okay, we're not talking about a mirror. We're talking about what's on your wall that your daddy painted for you.
Oh.
All these princesses.
This is Snow White, Belle, Cinderella, Rose, and that's a castle on my wall. And this is the flag. That's my wall with pink. And that's where I hang my stuff. And that's all. And thank you.
So you can see that she was much more able to talk about something that was there, that was concrete. She could become sort of interviewed and talking about something and telling me that's all. but I got a lot more information from her, and I wasn't even sure that she could label these princesses, that she could really communicate it all with me. And you can see how that helped with that participation. It's that drama. And a lot of times I'll use an accent when I'm interviewing one of them, and they seem to be, better able to talk to me then, because maybe it's sort of me hidden behind an accent. I don't know. It's sort of like when we wear the sunglasses, and there's less just actual contact with an individual when they're wearing glasses or when they have an accent. So let's talk about some of the behavioral characteristics, because these women and girls really do struggle a lot with that rigid and inflexible sort of style, which again relates back to that executive functioning. They get stuck, that executive in their brain gets stuck and can't execute any longer. They a lot of times get superficially extroverted, and that is just kind of a way to cover up for their anxiety. So you may have in a family one girl that is very shy and introverted and doesn't do much and hangs out in her room a lot, and her sister who's very extroverted, who sort of uses that as a way to connect with people. They definitely have poor impulse control, a lot of times trouble with personal boundaries. And this has to do with when they're dating, and a lot of times even friendships, that they sort of overdo it with these personal boundaries. I've got one of my clients that does texting, and she'll just drive people crazy with the number of texts that she sends or the calls that she sends. And she doesn't get that they have a boundary around how many times they want to text or how many times they want to talk a day. And a lot of times they have nonverbal learning disabilities, which we're all aware of, meaning that those things that are nonverbal, visual, spatial, those kinds of things are difficult for them. They avoid conflict. They really dislike conflict. And I think for them, just a simple conflict is really amplified, and they're afraid of it. And they're afraid that they're going to hurt somebody's feelings. They're afraid to be honest about that conflict. And so they avoid it. And then again, the looking away and the eye contact, that is also an issue. I want to show you a girl that comes to me for therapy, and she will demonstrate her difficulty with eye contact.
So, Hannah, there's another thing that I think is important to talk about, because what this is going to be used for is people in another country who might have girls growing up, and they kind of want to know what it's like to have Fragile X, what's kind of part of Fragile X, what isn't. I know one of the things that they're going to be thinking right now is she never looks at the camera. So tell me about that.
Never looking at cameras.
Or the person you're talking to.
Yeah.
That's hard.
It is hard. I am working on that exclusively.
How does Dr. Braden do that with you? What do we do?
We use a clicker thingy. Like, I don't even know what to call it.
It is. It's a clicker.
Okay, a clicker thing, and we do it for like 10 minutes. I think we do it for 10 minutes or 5 minutes, and that helps me to focus on just her. If I don't look at you, it's not because I'm ignoring you. It's because I'm trying to look at something else, because it scares. It's just anxiety prone. If I could talk.
Does it scare you to look at people in the face for some reason?
No. If I know you, like if I know you, like I know you, but like it's just difficult for me to sometimes. I want to, like, I get really distracted by other things. If I see something like on the wall, or like, I don't know, something else, I'll look at that instead of the person. Not on purpose, but because it's just, I get distracted and I go into my own little world.
So I think this is really important, because she's able to articulate what's really hard for her, and that she goes into her own little world rather than looking at you. She said it's not hard, but it is hard. And it's not hard if she knows you. Well, she knows me very well. There's another thing that you're probably wondering about, and those are the braces on her wrists. She doesn't wear those all the time. She seems to have all kinds of ailments. And I think that's a way for her to avoid situations. She can say, I can't get out today because my wrists are really sore, or I need to go to the doctor about my wrists because they're not working properly. Before it was her back. There are a number of things that are going on with her that nobody can find any reason for, but I think it's her way to sort of get out of social opportunities, or to have something that's legitimate in terms of an excuse in her mind. So this anxiety causes us to get sort of obsessive compulsive. And I don't know how many of my girls and guys have told me about all of the collections they have. And they can't get rid of any of them. And so parents have then said, look, these are taking over your room. Now they're moving into a family room. You're going to have to get rid of some of them in order to get new ones. And see, they get online and they order these things, and it's really difficult for them to give them up. But that collection and that obsession sort of calms the water. It makes people calmer when they can collect things and gather things, and that takes care of the anxiety. We talked about money management before, but a lot of times it's really difficult for these individuals as they get older. They start to overspend. It's really easy to get online and get that credit card out. Not understanding the value of money and what things cost, it can become very, very difficult. So this is something we need to do early on and help the girls while they're growing up understand money and what the meaning of what things cost, and how to really budget. Again, we've talked about how static math is not the problem, abstractions are. This is looking at the problems of daily living here and the organizational skills. This is difficult. And so a lot of people develop sorts of strategies and mechanisms to have in place to keep things in place. Some of the girls are meticulous, and other girls are so messy and can't keep track of anything. And this then gets sort of compounds all of their frustration, their anxiety, their stress because they can't find things and they need to get ready to go to school and things are misplaced. And so that clutter really makes their life difficult. We sometimes ask parents to get things organized and to have things labeled, like even here for clothing, so things go into certain bins, and that helps with this executive functioning deficit. Putting things away in the proper place really helps a lot, and the next time they need it, it's where it's supposed to be. It's just that organizational schema that they lack, and we're trying to build that in for them. Checklists, great. They really like these. We can also set timers. Now, sometimes this is a good thing and sometimes not so good. Sometimes we try to beat the timer, like, let's clean our room and see if we can beat the timer. How much time do you think it's going to take to put your shoes away? Try to start in really small increments and then work forward. How much time will it take for you to put all of your clothing, your laundry away, and your shoes? And then we'll see if you can beat the timer. So we set the timer to the time that they think it's going to take. And this is really interesting because they don't do a very good job of guessing. And usually the time that they say is less than they need. And of course, they don't beat the timer, but it's a really good concrete way to set that up. You want to look at things like distractions, as we talked about before, high interests. When they finish something, it's a reward. So it's not easy for them to organize and get things put away, but let's give them a reward at the end. Number the tasks so they know how many are there and they can check them off as they go, and start the first step for them. And I think this is something that's really critical. Problems again, saying no to friends and acquaintances, not using good judgment in social settings. They will sort of acquiesce. They will not state their position. If there's something that's going on they don't like, oftentimes they will not talk about that, or they will not say, resist it and say, I don't think this is the right thing to do. A lot of times that means they take a lot of risks that they really don't want to take. And the reason, again, for this is that they're afraid of conflict. They don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. They don't want somebody to yell at them if they say, no, I'm not interested in that. And I know parents are thinking right now, well, wait a minute, when they're home with me, there is no problem with them expressing their true intent. And that's very true at home where they're comfortable. When they're out with friends or acquaintances, this is very difficult. They actually trust people they probably shouldn't. And they have trouble reading those cues. these are also some things that come up in the development, and they have some difficulty as they're developing as females. Really adjusting to their body changes like breast buds and wearing a bra, tampon, or a menstrual pad. Those are things that are very difficult for them and tend to be more difficult for them than the typical people typically developing. And basically, that's all about this change, this inflexibility, this misunderstanding about things, some insecurities about menstruation, some insecurities about, why I do this and what that menstruation means. So this is difficult for them. And then going forward, managing sexual relationships, like taking their birth control pills if they're on birth control, or being very careful and abstinent if they're engaged in sex. So this is an area where we notice more and more going on with these girls, and we just need to be able to strategize with them specific things around. Let's check the checklist. Let's look at maybe it's better for you to have the shot monthly rather than taking the everyday birth control pills. There's a lot of ways to strategize to get to really the end result that's going to make more sense for these girls. Staying alone is difficult for them, and a lot of times they're really excited when they can tell me that they've actually stayed overnight at home while their parents have left. Restaurants noisy, going to a movie and all the amplification of the sound, that's hard for some of them. And Hannah, the one that you saw about that was talking about eye contact, cannot go to a movie, and it's just too much for her to hear all of that sound, even if she wears earplugs, headsets, whatever. It's just too much, and I think it's coming from the back, and it's just too hard. Exercise can be difficult, and that's because of their low muscle tone. And a lot of times they're very sedentary. I hear parents asking all the time, what can we do about this? Well, how can we get them more active? And they tend to like more the carbohydrates and the high calorie snacks rather than the ones that are good for them. I had one of my friends with Fragile X tell me that I'd say, I don't see you eating many salads. And she said, well, that's rabbit food. I don't eat salads. Driving can be a challenge because of that visual spatial. Remember all the research that I talked about. So finding your place. Also parking and not understanding where you are in the parking place. This is one of the girls that I know in Wisconsin, and she's since married, so she doesn't live there anymore, but her dad put these up so that when they drove in, they would be better able to guess and estimate where they were in space because they were taking off rear view mirrors all the time. So here's a nice strategy and a remedy for that, and that seemed to work really well. Relationships, again, a lot of times they hook up with controlling males, and it becomes sort of evident beginning of the relationship. But once again, they're averse to that conflict, and a lot of times they don't speak up. They can't really talk about their true feelings. And then also they get sometimes angry and abusive and yell at somebody that they're dating. And that's a problem too. Because they can't really talk about what's going on. So instead, they just blow up, and that then ends the relationship. And sometimes maybe that's what they want. It's easier than saying, I don't want to date you anymore. I don't want to go out on any date with you again. The eye contact becomes an issue, and the tangential conversations, because they can't go back and forth in that reciprocity to really explain where they are and have a good conversation. And then they kind of become pretty dramatic over things that happen that tend to be insignificant. And I've had a lot of guys tell me that, I just can't do this anymore because everything that happens is a big deal, a big event. So this little gal is going to tell us just a little bit about her relationships at school.
So that's why I was calling this shrimp.
What about the girls at school? How do you feel about them in your class?
Kind of, well, the girls in my class now, they kind of want, there's one girl I sat next to at lunch, and she's my only friend there. So, it's kind of a new thing because
I'm just going to stop it there because she's basically telling you that it's really hard for her to have relationships, and she moved and it's a new school. But here's, I think, as important, when we talked about the verbal skills and the auditory processing, you can see how she starts the conversation, repeats the question, so that kind of gets some sort of a concrete effect in her brain that she can remember what the question was, and then also maybe stalling out just a little bit so that she has more time to formulate an answer. So again, this is twofold. There's quite a few reasons for watching this video, to talk about her relationships and how difficult it is, and that she only has one friend, but also to show you how hard it is for them to really converse and give a good sequential conversation. So all the shyness, interests, bring them together with others. That's one good way to connect these girls with each other. Communication can be difficult, and oftentimes it causes a relationship to end. The constant talking, the constant texting, those are things that get in the way. A lot of times this is very important because the social communication is skewed, and sometimes the males that they're dating think that the girl is flirting with them, when in fact they're really kind of scared about the situation, and they might even engage in some giggling and some sort of response that really is all about their anxiety, and that causes a problem. So again, that can be sort of dodgy, and can get harmful, because the boys get tired of feeling like the girls are interested, and then they reject them in a way that's inappropriate. So again, the conflict issues in the relationships, and trouble advocating for themselves. Here is a relationship that ended in a very positive way, and she's now married, and this is it was a great event to be able to attend her wedding, and she's happily married. Vocational, I'm going to go through this just briefly because I think it's important for us to talk a little bit about what kinds of vocational skills these individuals developed and where they really can work and be successful. So a lot of times it's in childcare. Sometimes it becomes difficult because we go back to that relationship piece, that in a lot of these situations where they may be working, the relationships get distorted. They may feel like somebody was rude to them, or that they don't like them because they had to correct them in their work. And this happens a lot. And so again, we need to get them ready for the world of work. We need to help them understand that they're going to get feedback. They're going to make some mistakes, and they have to do that in order to be a good worker. We do know that 8-hour days oftentimes are too stressful for the men and the women with Fragile X. And if it includes a social expectation for them, it's a lot more difficult because they know that they have to interact, and that's hard for them. Also, if there's a time limit to turn out a specific product, that can cause a lot of anxiety, and they want to quit immediately because they know they're on that timeline and they can't execute. They can't get it done. So sometimes they work with children. Many young girls choose the path of early intervention, and some get degrees in that. They get some associate's degrees. Also working with animals in a shelter or in a vet's office, and a lot of them have tried for vet tech, which is a certification here in the United States, so they can be a technology to, let's start that again. In a vet tech situation where they can then assist a veterinarian. Sometimes they enjoy food prep, catering, those kinds of things. And then also they're very competent on the computer. And they've been in situations where they may actually be buying things on eBay. And we've turned that around to say, you know what, let's get your collections on eBay and let's see if you can sell some of these. Again, there's that issue of getting rid of things and not collecting. Sometimes we use their kind of OCD trait to help them with, some details and quality controlling. So this person works at a graphic design building, and she, in that capacity, she does a really good job with being sort of obsessive about looking and making sure everything is correct. So I want to talk about psychiatric symptoms. This is important as well. Sometimes these females seem pretty depressed and actually meet the diagnostic criteria for depression. The one thing that we've talked about before that's critical to discuss is the anxiety and the social phobias. And because they're anxious, they can then become very obsessive and compulsive because that's their attempt to calm themselves down and not be as anxious. Think about it. If you're rigid, if you're obsessive about things, you're in control, right? And that makes you feel better about your anxiety. Sometimes we see bipolar disorder in this population, and a lot of times they're dependent personality. In other words, they depend on others to do their problem solving. And when that's a man or a woman that's not especially good for them, then we need to really be careful about sort of setting up the stage in terms of who they pick to be in relationships with, not to be with those people that control them. Let's talk about hyperarousal because it does affect females. I know you often hear it connected with the males, but it definitely does. And what is hyperarousal? Well, it's the nervous system being overwhelmed and overactivated by things that need to be processed and things that are sort of demanding in terms of it's got to go into my brain and I've got to think about it and then I have to execute a plan. The triggers for this hyperarousal can be the sensory environment, can be loud noises, can be their need to be social and have to interact. Also, a lot of internal processing for cognition, that executive functioning, and them knowing that they have to respond and not being able to respond or not being able to ask for help or clarification. That's a big trigger for hyperarousal. So as the nervous system becomes overstimulated and shifts to heightened responding, we see their overreactivity occurring. It becomes really difficult for them. Now, sometimes they may become sort of withdrawn and they won't respond. And if you press them to respond, that's when you see the hyperarousal really rearing its ugly head, so to speak. They may get into an automatic fear, flight, or fight response. That causes them to sort of be unable to control themselves. And we've seen our females, I'm sure you've had those experiences, whether they're young children or they're full adults. They get very upset and unable to control themselves or to self-regulate. And that's when they sort of spew out lots of bad words or hateful comments, or they may tear something up. They may retreat. They may go into a room and get rid of things that they really enjoy, and yet that's their way of expressing this hyperarousal. It leads to a disorganized state. They're really disorganized. They're unable to think clearly. And that sensory modulation, that reduced attention, that decreased self-regulation and ability to really process information really causes them havoc. And that's when we have to pull back and understand, first of all, what the triggers are for this hyperarousal and what it looks like before it gets completely out of control. Because at that point, then we're going to back off, we're going to ask for less, we're going to use less verbiage, and we're going to help them process the situation. We know that it really is the hardwiring. We know that it's in the brain, that this anxiety is all related to the neurobiology of this gene. And it creates a debilitating emotional deficit. It really can become very, very difficult for them. And it really dictates to them when it gets severe. It dictates what they can and can't do. And it becomes so much a part of who they are in their lifestyle that it's debilitating. It's based on irrational fear. We know that. But this is very real to these individuals. And it's been documented that they have higher rates of anxiety manifested in the social phobias and the specific phobias, such as flying and driving, talking on the phone. And then they become avoidant. And that avoidant personality is the way that they cope. It becomes habituated in terms of who they are. It can become, the avoidance can become a form of lying, not responding, fabricating stories. And I hate to call it lying, but that's really what it then evolves into, because they're trying to avoid an unpleasant situation. So they may make up this ridiculous story to explain why they left, Or they may say to a friend, I can't meet with you tonight because mom told me I couldn't, or I'm feeling ill. And this happens over and over again. And those excuses then really don't work for them, and they become more isolated. So because they have so much fear of conflict, they would rather not express their worry or their concern, but hide behind their shyness. They might cry, they might withdraw, they might become irritable. And when they cry, and this maybe sound cold-hearted a little bit, but often the way we respond to that is by leaving them alone, or by thinking, I better not talk to them about that ever again, when in fact we need to probe, we need to know what's going on. Now, it may not be at that particular time frame, but we need to probe through social stories and other things I'm going to talk to you about in just a minute that are good tools that we can use to get at what's really worrying them or why they're withdrawing. So parents will tell me, I don't understand how she told you all of that. I was just in England and I was interviewing a young girl who actually shared a lot of information with me that her mom was really amazed about. But this happens a lot. And why is that? Because they're very close to their caregivers. They're close to their parents, grandparents, whatever it might be. And a lot of that has to do with that relationship again. So if we're a little bit farther, second generation out, a lot of times they're going to feel better about sharing that information. And they're also afraid of the conflict that may come from disappointing a parent with that relationship being closer. The triggers, a lot related to routine, a lot about changes in that routine, meeting new people, making contacts, making phone calls. Now, once they know you, they can drive you crazy with phone calls, but it's that initial beginning stage. Starting and doing jobs, sometimes they'll get very anxious about it, not so much because they really are resenting the job or want to rebel against the job. They don't know how to start. And I have heard this so many times from women and girls who I've said, why did you get in trouble for not getting your chores done or your jobs done? And they said, it was so overwhelming, I didn't know where to start. And I said, could you not have told somebody that? Could you not have told your mom that? Instead, you just sort of became reclusive and you sat in your room and you got a book out or you looked through something. And when it was time for you to be finished and your mom came into the room, you were just sitting there doing nothing. And that then caused a problem. Had you been able to say, I don't know where to start. Can you help me, Mom? Can we start this together? Or moms and dads, if you had developed a checklist for them to put their laundry away, check it off. Do something else, check it off. That might have been helpful in terms of how to initiate. Again, it's the executive functioning deficit. If they observe anything that seems conflictual to them, and sometimes it's not conflict, but somebody's raising a voice, they definitely perceive it as a conflict. That is extremely aversive to them. And they're afraid of what might happen next. The loud noises, the large crowds and busy environments. So let's talk about anxiety and inflexibility, because I get this asked a lot. Why does she get so stuck? Why will she not bend? Why do we have to go do things without her? Because her anxiety is flared up so high that she has to just dig in and stay somewhere that's comfortable and predictable. It causes her to have phobias, panic attacks, and obsessive compulsive disorder, meaning she's so afraid, she's so anxious that she's got these irrational fears that might relate to flying, that might relate to crossing the street, that might relate to climbing stairs. That phobia becomes so solid and so integrated into her being, trying to really verbally talk it through and explain it to her, there's no reason to try that. We have to use other ways that are sort of second generation, in other words, not direct, but talking about somebody else that has the phobia, or reading a story about somebody else that has the phobia. That's how you can make this so sort of more manageable for them, and they will listen to you at that point. That inflexibility is really how they remedy their anxiety. They decide, I'm not going to do that anymore. That was too scary. That made me too anxious. I'm done. And so every single time that activity comes up or that opportunity comes up, they're inflexible. They've made that the rule. I'm never going to do that again, because if I do, I'm going to get anxious. So we have to work on those things. And that's some of the strategies I want to share with you. So we've learned a lot about the impact of social anxiety on daily living, and it does really take over for a lot of these individuals. There are predictive factors such as social development in adolescence and family dynamics that might support genetics, in terms of not always can we say it's all about how methylated they may or may not be, but there are things in the family that help us predict what the outcome's going to be. If a family is reclusive, there's just going to be no way that this girl is going to be probably an extrovert. She may be, but it would be rare, because her activities and her environment is set up so that people stay home and do things alone. So remember that if that comes up, and if your daughter is becoming more reclusive. Also, things around just dynamics in terms of maybe mom's outgoing, dad is not. Maybe a lot of the siblings are very outgoing. You have to look at those dynamics in terms of what's going on in that environment to sort of predict who's going to be have social anxieties. And if the girl with Fragile X doesn't actualize normal social development through adolescence, and they're going to have limited peer relationships, they're going to have limited opportunities to understand how relationships work and practice that, and that's going to become a problem. And also, like I said, the family dynamics do mediate what really goes on in terms of peer relationships and primary support for your daughters. So we're going to remedy this anxiety. We're going to do it the same way that anybody would be taught in therapy that may have anxiety, but these are nice visuals. We're not going to just talk it through like we might do deep breathing or deep relaxation with neurotypical individuals. We're going to have these reminders there, and we're going to have these in their room. We're going to have it in their binder. We're going to have it on the back of their phone. We're going to have it in places that are accessible, and they're going to know what to do when they get anxious. And they're also going to know the triggers for anxiety, and the girls get really good at identifying those. And then pulling this out and being able to just do a quick something that's a calming down routine, so that then they can be more positive. And, the smelling the flower and blowing out the candle is really easy. One that helps with the deep breathing. We do a couple of those, and maybe if we can do the calm down routine that's here, that you can see that you go through those steps. Again, young girls behind the parent, they're so socially anxious, they're very shy. And sometimes that's the only thing that people kind of talk about when we're talking about individuals, females with Fragile X, that they maybe at a school, they may say, well, she does just fine. She's a little shy, but that's not a big deal. And we overlook then these individuals, and we don't really refer them for treatment. Again, the shyness, the avoidance, they get more and more anxious as they age, especially if they've been able to just retreat and not do much when they're anxious. It really becomes problematic, and they make up excuses. And sometimes it's really real, but then it becomes habituated. So if we're anxious sometimes, and those of you that have anxiety know that you may get kind of sick to your stomach, you might get headaches. There could be some physiological reaction to the anxiety. Well, that kind of starts to habituate in these individuals. And so it's, the girl may agree to a plan, and then at the end of the interaction, just excruciating energy trying to formulate an excuse that's legitimate. So they go back to the time they were ill, and they simply say, I have a headache, or my stomach hurts, or I just don't feel good today. And that's then how they get out of an interaction or an opportunity to be social, because just thinking about it can actually become something physiological. Sometimes they don't want to say no to anybody because, as I said before, they're afraid they're going to hurt their feelings, or the rejection is going to cause a conflict. So we have to help them sort of choose some appropriate coping strategies. And I think what you really need to do is go in and say, you know what, when I was your age, and we can do this with parents, we can do it with grandparents, carers, doesn't matter. Just sort of make this up, even if it's not true, and say, when I was your age, I used to get kind of anxious too around these times. And sometimes I didn't want to go do something and it was really hard, but I developed some strategies that helped me in this, time. And I think that helps then sort of reduce the anxiety created from knowing that you're maybe having a problem, you're going to cause a problem, whatever it is. And I think that if you kind of go in with that reassurance and talk to them a little bit about it could have happened to you or your aunt or something like that, that's really helpful. I think also when they're stressed out, just sort of pulling out an album or looking at your phone and looking at some silly pictures or going back to a vacation you took, that's a good way to sort of ramp down the anxiety in the moment, because these are things that happen and you can't just be able to go somewhere and get some sort of a tool that's going to help. Also, maybe you sort of look at social stories, and we're going to talk about that as well. So I think just having that predictability of scheduling, having some alternative sorts of strategies that you can pull out and help them with, because they're going to learn from you. Hey, that really helped when mom pulled out her phone and looked at her photos. I'm going to do that the next time. I've got my phone and I've got a lot of the same photos. And also then just knowing that those things are there for them when they do get anxious, because I think a lot of the anxiety just implodes because they don't know what to do in those situations and they hate the way they feel. So I like people to sort of encourage memorizing a set of responses in lieu of saying no, maybe doing something separate, like I'll have to check my schedule. So if they're asked to do something and they don't know what to say and they get really anxious about that, and instead of saying, okay, and then later having to come up with an excuse and getting sick about it, I always tell them, when you get to that situation and you really want to say no, but you're afraid to say no, say something like, I'll have to check my schedule, or I need to know if there are any family plans, or I might have a conflict. And that gives them a chance to sort of pull back and regroup and not have to worry about saying yes when maybe they want to say no. Again, when we have a nonverbal female, it's a lot harder because there's things that they want to tell us that they don't know how to tell. So again, they may really get anxious about things, and instead of being able to tell us, I'm anxious because I don't want to go here, they're going to then rebel through some behavior or try to express some sort of conflict, or maybe they really don't want to do something, and so they might kick or bite, or they might hit, and that becomes their way of communicating something that they don't want to do. So the key is to pair the verbal with the gestural, with maybe a low tech or maybe a talker that they may have here, and try to teach them ways that they can express their feelings. And maybe it's a protest, and maybe they need to be able to say no, or that they're protesting against a choice that you're giving them. I like to use music and rhythm, and even though they may not be real verbal, they certainly can hear music, they can understand rhythm, and that's something that reduces the anxiety. And then pull out things that are interesting. They can look at family pictures the same as someone who actually can talk. We like to use these because it gives them an opportunity to pick sort of a feeling, and they can talk to us about what they need. Do they need a hug? Do they want to listen to music? Are they sad? And we put into these pictures maybe their favorite actress, or maybe a series that they watch, and then they can see pictures because they'll attend to that a lot better. If they feel sick, and this is so hard because they can't express that, and so what do they do instead in their anxiety about feeling sick or anxious about vomiting or whatever it is? They're going to react behaviorally. A lot of times dogs, animals, that's good remedy for anxiety. Just talk to your dog, get your pet out. Again, pay attention to body language. These are really good things that Dr. Epstein, and you've heard her talk, I think, to the group about toileting. These are some really good strategies. Be sure you pay attention. I think this is so important because when you watch those outward signs, they may not look like they're related to anxiety at all when they really are. Chewing more, hiding more, getting flushed and red, Those are ways that some of your younger children or people that are nonverbal may really be trying to express they're anxious. And then pay attention to what you already know about them and help them calm down with things that will give them a good distraction. When you kind of think about what they're really interested in and you pay attention to that, that's a good way to provide a distraction from being really anxious. And then help them model the feeling. So you may say, you know what? I think you're feeling really worried about this. And here's what we can do to talk about our worry. And so you're going to have practice in terms of feeling pictures or things that they can help sort of articulate what's really going on. And then again, all of the strategies that we have. And I like this idea about the deep breathing. Do it before a transition or before something that you know is going to be difficult. And this is a life skill. We can actually teach these young females as they progress and get older. When you are in an anxious situation and you know what those are, start breathing ahead of time and start doing some positive self-talk. So another thing is maybe making a video of one of your other siblings and what they do in terms of the deep breathing, the strategies, so that they can look at that and sort of put it again, third party into another person's life, so that that's going to be something that they can watch and they can say, I can do that too. Be careful about the words you use, because this is really important. Even though you're helping them focus on something that's happening in the present moment, try to offer some reassurance in a way that's reassuring. So you may be anxious too to see your daughter or the person you're caring for, your granddaughter, being in such a difficult situation, being so uncomfortable and sad and upset. But let's be careful about the language we use and try to sort of modify what our feelings are. And then let's pull it apart, adding a piece at a time in terms of those self-regulation skills and ways that you can build strategies around what to do when you're anxious. If you give it to her all at the same time, it's not going to work. You have to pick it apart and take it into pieces. So here's our worry chart, and a lot of you are familiar with that. A lot of therapists will use that. I would say something that you can just look up online, or if you need information about it, I'm sure Wendy or Liz can get me that information and I can get it to you so that they can share this with you. I like this because I put it into, and actually one of the Kiwis helped me with this. She said, you know, I think rather than using the 5 points, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's use dice, because that's a better visual and kind of explains it. And let's use some colors to differentiate. So when you're at a 5 and you're pretty hot and upset, then I think it's going to be red. And we used emojis because most of them are really familiar with emojis. So it's a great way for them to relate. And then we can change this. This is their wording. So what does it look like when you're a 5, when you're really, really upset? Well, I freak out. I have a panic attack. I'm really upset. Okay. All right. That's the words we're going to use. And this is, you know, you can use any words you want. So you can go in and change this. And then let's say it's a 3. So yeah, kind of in the middle, but you're worried, you're a little bit nervous, you're anxious, whatever their words are, you use here, not our words, but their words. And then what's it like when everything's okay? Well, thumbs up, it's okay. So what we use this for is when they have an event or they get anxious, they can actually point and tell you what it looks like rather than having to talk about it in the moment. So let's say, here's how we use it. We kind of practice it with things they've told me in therapy or they've talked to you about. Standing up in front of the classroom and talking. Okay, would that be a 5? Would that be a 3? It helps us quantify exactly how difficult that situation is and how much anxiety is provoked by that situation. How about flying? Okay, let's go back to that chart. That's about a 3. I don't really get that upset. I get worried, but I can do it. So anyway, that's the way to do this. And it's a good way for us to get more content around what's really going on, and also they're learning how to express exactly how bad that feeling is or the anxiety is. Social stories, really important. It's a great tool because it really helps resolve conflict and suggest remedies. But because it's not you saying, you know, when this happens again, this is what you need to do, because this time when you did this, it turned out to be a disaster. And then I had to get a call from the principal and it was just terrible and blah, blah, blah. So that's going to be too direct and they already feel bad about it. So why would we sort of rub it in? I think the social story allows content around an episode that's happened, because you can structure it, you can customize it, and that female then is able to really understand what happened in that particular situation. It gives context to what happened to them. It gives them the ability to reduce that level of anxiety and receive the information. So again, we're going to put that into a structure of a social story. Sometimes when you're getting ready to go to the airport, you panic. And when you panic, you tend to cry a lot. And when you're upset like that, you decide you don't want to go. And if anybody talks to you about that, then you lose it and you have you yell or whatever. The next time you are ready to go to the airport, we're going to look at our calendar ahead of time, and we're going to realize that there are days ahead that we can do certain things. And when it's time to go to the airport, you're going to breathe and we're going to do this and that. So what it does is it describes the incident if you're doing a social story, and the next part of that social story is a remedy. It's like the next time, what are you going to do? And then it's sort of a happy ending to the book, because at the end, then when you employ these techniques, you're going to feel so much better about the situation and you're not going to be as embarrassed. I love graphic novels, and this is something that we're using more and more with this population. And a graphic novel is really a novel that talks, that has a lot of pictures, that the pictures tell the story with very little verbiage. And we're able to do a lot of really neat stuff with individuals who maybe don't have a high reading level, but they can really get the content from the pictures. And this person I like a lot. Her name's Raina Telgemeier, I believe I'm saying that right. She has written some wonderful books about that really I think are helpful for girls, especially. And one of them, this was drama and what happens at school and all the drama that goes on. But another one that I didn't cite here is one that talks about being anxious, frankly, and how it's really hard for this girl to go to a friend's house. And the friend is Japanese and they eat a lot of Japanese food. And this is something this girl does not like, but she likes this girl, her friend. And so she has to figure out, how can she talk to her about not going over to eat dinner? Or how can she talk to her about bringing her own dinner, because she doesn't, and it's so good because she gets stomach aches and she doesn't know what to do. And then she finally talks to her mom about it. So these novels can tell the story in a way that's, like I said, the kind of a third generation over from the initial issue, and they can hear it and they can relate to it. This is all about somebody who just doesn't fill in, who doesn't fit in and is sort of a dork at school. And a lot of my girls tell me that. They say, I'm just not interested in the things that a lot of these preppy, popular girls are interested in. And this kind of tells a lot of stories about that. And it's actually fun and comical. This is one more thing that I use. I will pick up from therapy things that they tell me that are difficult for them, and I put them onto sort of a worksheet, I guess you could say. And some of the things they've told me that are really hard for them, and some of the things that are easy for them. I can do this online or in person. I can share my screen and I can come up with, they'll pick the color that they want for easy, and they'll pick the color for hard. And as we read it, or if they don't read, I will remember this is something they talked to me about. So I'll say the first one is learning to drive. Is that easy or hard? Hard. What color is hard? Red. Okay, I'll circle it in red. It just gives us a nice way to communicate about those worries, but it's on paper and it's not so direct. So I can get a lot more information from them. Okay, everyone, this really concludes my part of the presentation. It's been lengthy, it's been complex. I've given you lots to think about, but I hope I've also given you good opportunity or strategies and things that you can employ that will work with the females in your lives, whether you're a carrier or a family member. And I think we should just take a break right now so that you can kind of think about what we've talked about and some of the strategies. And when we come back, Liz will introduce our special guest.
You'll see on the screen a lovely picture of Megan, who is our guest speaker for today. Megan is someone who has a lived experience of Fragile X syndrome.
So my name's Megan. You may remember me from the webinar on Monday. So I was a guest speaker with Dr. Marcia Braden. So I'm doing this recording a few days later when I'm now home. So I'm here to talk about my experience as an FX woman navigating work. So I graduated high school in 2003. I was 17. And up to that point, I'd never had a job. So after high school, I went and did a Cert 4 in business to get that qualification so I could get an admin job. So it was a little bit of a struggle with that transition from such a structured environment at school to a workplace, or even a TAFE in this instance, because no one taught us how to do that. No one taught us how to behave in a workplace as opposed to school, because I just behaved how I'd always behaved at school with, you know, people in authority and whatnot. So I did the course for about 3 months in 2004. And then I got a job at a small firm after that. And it was difficult because I suppose everybody was very much, what would be a good word for that? I suppose it was a boutique firm in a way, sophisticated. They were very professional, I suppose, very polished people. And I never really come across people like that. So trying to fit in with them was very difficult in that respect. They certainly did have expectations of, well, everyone that works there. And I think that caused a bit of tension because I never knew what their expectations were. I was just trying to do my job as best I could, but they weren't really very sort of open-minded or patient, you know, to sort of teach me stuff, I guess. So that was hard, and also trying to work out how to be at work as well. And navigating social interactions, well, that has always been difficult for me. Trying to pick up on social cues, body language, you know, facial expressions, tone of voice, the usual stuff like that. I did that job for about 16 months. So it would have been sometime in 2000 and maybe the end of 2005 and 2006. I'm trying to exactly remember when it happened, that I left that job. I won't go into detail as to what happened. That's fairly irrelevant. But basically, it forced me to face my diagnosis head on. Basically, up until that point, I would pretend it wasn't there. Or if I did ever acknowledge its presence, I'd pretend it didn't matter. I didn't have to worry about it. And at that point, boy, did I learn the hard way about having to face it and what it meant for my future, that I had to deal with it, that I had to realize that this was going to impact my daily life, and how was I going to go on from there. I bounced around a little bit with, you know, temp jobs and all of that sort of thing. Didn't really have a lot of luck with that. I think they were probably looking for people that had more experience than I did at the time. And also I didn't have a license as well. And that was one sticking point with a lot of admin jobs. You had to have a license, which is fair enough if you had to run errands and do what, and travel around Brisbane and do whatnot and do things out and about. That's fine, but I didn't have a license, so I'd have to rely a lot on public transport. I did deal with a employment agency for people with disabilities, but they weren't really very well helpful, I suppose. Anything I got work-wise was on my effort, not necessarily theirs. It wasn't a good fit, I suppose would be the way to put it. It just didn't work out because I was capable of looking for work how everyone else does, you know, via the internet, newspapers, you know, social media, etc. I could do that myself. But the other thing also with work is that I had to learn how to take constructive criticism. I tended to think it was sort of more like personally attacking. They were personally attacking me, that there was something about me they didn't like. but it was actually just criticism they'd give anyone, you know, in that situation. And I had to learn to take their feedback and then work on, you know, improving that area of my work ethic, working life, I suppose, actually take it on board and what it was. So I had to learn how to, you know, to do that. And also taking responsibility for my own actions and accountability and taking accountability for them and saying, yes, okay, I made a mistake. What can I do to, you know, improve it? That sort of thing. And also I will say, once I'd stopped fighting the FX so much, once I'd sort of just trying to just dismiss it, try to get rid of it, trying to, you know, downplay it, it became a bit easier to deal with. You know, I work with it, not against it. Work to your strengths. It's easy to say, but my goodness, it's hard to do. But it took a while, and it was just much easier to actually deal with once I'd stopped fighting this thing. So this went on for a bit. So I would have thought around, let's see, when I stopped the temp jobs would have been around 2010, 2011, I would say. So probably about 2005, 2011 would have been probably the ups and downs with temporary work. And then 2012, at this point, I was doing some volunteer work at a major hospital in Brisbane. That's where I'm from. So I would have been, so 2012, so I'm trying to think. I was 26 by this point. So I did some volunteer work just in their admin area. So I started out doing some data entry in the volunteer centre. They have a big volunteer centre up there. So data entry. And then I got the opportunity to do some basic, you know, admin work in their centre for one morning a week. And then I got the opportunity to pick up a couple more shifts and 2 other areas of the hospital. A difference made is probably maybe the personalities of the people. We gelled a bit better. They were very supportive. And they're also very appreciative of the fact that the volunteers were there at all, because a lot of things would not have got done if the volunteers weren't there to do it, or they would have taken longer to do certain things. So they were very appreciated. We were very appreciated by all the paid staff in the hospital. And we did all, you know, we were everywhere, all over the place, in all corners. But I just concentrated on those 3 areas that I worked in. They're all very different from each other. Everybody was lovely, you know, very supportive. I really enjoyed doing the volunteer work, actually. But then after a while, I realized, well, can't really sort of pay your bills on volunteer work. So we, me and Mum and Dad, we moved down south to where I am now. And about a month and a half after we'd been here, I got the work where I work now. I did disclose at that point that I had FX. I'd had some interesting reactions up until that point. Probably once I'd decided around sort of 2008-ish, 2009, when I was 23, 24, that we were going to disclose, because it just seemed easier, you know, at least give the employer a heads up that this was here. It was probably the best reaction I've ever had, really. I mean, they really didn't care, or they didn't seem to care anyway, too much about it, because I think their priorities were elsewhere. That other things like being hardworking and being motivated and being helpful and being, you know, supportive, willing to help each other, I think that's probably more of a priority to them. So it was probably that environment where they were just like, you know, you get on and do your work. You know, there are people here you can go to ask questions. If you need something, you know, clarified, we all help each other. And it's I suppose, a good fit, because I just sort of like, you know, all the record keeping and information management and, you know, the technology side of it, because what I do now is more on the technology side than on, you know, filing, I suppose, paper filing and dealing with paper records. But everybody's very much, you know, appreciative of each other's knowledge and skills and experience, and they're open-minded and all of that. So that made a big difference. And also sort of gelling with people as well. And I'd also grown up as from when I, you know, first started, you know, working till now. So it was a lot of that, and yeah, a lot of learning along the way about, you know, how to make the best out of what I had, you know, play to the strengths rather than trying to fight it so much. It can sound easy to say that and hard to do, but you know that eventually we'll get it. And when I say maybe do something like what I did with volunteering, you know, they just appreciate the fact that you're there, you know, doing work for them. It might not be in the area that, you know, you want to spend the rest of your life working in, but it was something, it was a foot in the door, as Mum likes to say as well. They got my start. So yeah, so pretty much that was, yeah, the journey of work, bouncing around between temp jobs and feeling like I'd taken 3 steps forward and then about 10 steps backwards, and then kind of had to deal with that, like, why isn't this working? You know, it cannot be that difficult to, you know, to do this. But yeah, so it was quite a journey without going into too much detail, but that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And obviously I had very supportive parents, obviously, as well. That helped. But also trying to, once I'd stopped, as I said, once I stopped fighting the effects and sort of just facing it head on and being like, okay, I'm going to work with it, not against it. You know, take me for what I am. I wasn't going to try and, you know, change myself to be something else just to fit in with you. You know, let me show you what I can do. Let me show you what my capabilities are. And, you know, to work together. And I still obviously do that with, you know, with people. Obviously still get, you know, feedback or stuff. I was like, oh, you know, you need to do this or do that, or like it this way, or that's what I meant with this. So yeah, well, that's pretty much how I got to where I am now with work. So been an interesting journey, I'll give it that, but certainly one that was worth taking in the end, because I learned a lot about life, learned about myself, learned about, you know, working and whatever. So yeah, it was good. So yeah, so the social side of things, with school was always a bit difficult. As I said, you know, we're trying to understand social cues, facial expressions, like body language, about how I was supposed to react to certain things. Sometimes I don't think I reacted the way people expected me to react. So that might have caused it. I was probably more, you know, it might have been, I was very academic, sort of, I like to read. I like to be in my own little world with, you know, reading books. That's where I like to be. I'd often spend lots of time in the library just sitting, you know, in front of the fiction section and just reading whatever book caught my eye, pretty much. I wasn't ever overly sporty, so I didn't have that in common with anyone. I mean, we had to participate in, obviously, school carnivals and whatnot, but I wasn't one of the, you know, top school athletes either. You know, I tended to gel with maybe people that might be a bit younger than me rather than people my own age, or a bit older as well. That always seemed to be something that I could gel with. Even nowadays, it seems to be a bit like that. Although I have gotten a bit better over the years about how to relate to them. Sometimes I talk about, I might do a conversation starter like what have they watched recently? You know, if I get that question too. You know, what have you watched recently on one of the streaming platforms, for instance? And you sort of start to talk to that as well, because that can sort of sometimes open up conversations. Or if they have pets, or they've been somewhere cool recently or whatever, that I can gel to that. But yeah, school I didn't have a lot of friends, I suppose. I mean, I'm an only child, so I spent a lot of time on my own, and sometimes it was, you know, to me, I was more comfortable by myself than with people, because I never really knew how to, you know, to interact with them. So that was hard. And then coming into work, well, that was different again. We're trying to figure out how to be, you know, a professional worker, as well as, you know, being like social with people. Again, it might have been a personality clash as well, that I didn't, you know, like the same things, or I wasn't into the same things, or I hadn't had the same experiences. And some of the other people that I worked with, the other women, I mean, they were perfectly polite, but we were never going to necessarily be, fast friends. So that was hard. And also having the confidence to go out and like pursue, social activities. As you know, obviously people with FX have issues with anxiety. That certainly got in the way multiple times. And I kind of think now that I was like, I probably missed out on some cool stuff, because of my anxiety, because I was just like, oh no, it's too far away or too late at night or too something, that I just make up some excuse about not want to go. But nowadays with work, with the social stuff, I try to join in a bit more because I feel, more comfortable with the people. We do like, the Christmas parties and other activities through, the year that sort of bring us together, especially since we spend more time working at home now than we do in the office. So it's nice to sort of have those times when, we are together in person. I can go catch up with people that, I hadn't spoken to for a while. And obviously with work, we still have our work chat that we use all the time, to keep in touch as well. Feels a bit less like you're a bit less isolating. But yeah, I think the social stuff sort of got a bit better, and I had to sort of realize a few things. I was like, oh, maybe, don't react that way in this situation, react differently, sort of learn to take cues from other people about how I suppose they react and maybe copy it in a way. But yeah, it's still difficult making friends, but it is better now, depending on most of them are through work, but it's better than it was when I was at school. But yeah, I mean, I suppose some people FX probably think that why can't I be normal? Why can't I be like everyone else? And I'm like, well, I'd probably thought that too. But then again, I was like, well, me is enough. There's only one of you. So why don't you be yourself? And if people don't like that, well, whatever, it doesn't matter. In the end, I certainly wasn't going to change who I am just to fit in with other people's, expectations. Just be you. It's better than trying to be normal. And what's normal anyway? I have no idea. I've had the conversations with other people before too, so I don't know. I don't know what normal is. So yeah, I just sort of, be myself really with people at work that I socialize with, and they either do or they don't. But they're quite accepting of everyone. We're very help each other out with all sorts of things, and yeah, we have some good times nowadays. I think, yeah, no, it's good fun. But we do still obviously, get all the things we need to do done as well. But yeah, the social interaction is much better than it used to be for me. But yeah, it can be hard or feel like, you're the odd one out. And yes, I'm pretty sure I used to feel that way. But I suppose that's part of dealing with this sort of thing. That sometimes you might feel that way, but maybe I just hadn't found my like-minded people yet, at school, that I focus more on the academic side rather than being the sporty person. And things like maths or anything, analytical was just beyond me. I'm better at it now. I mean, what I do now is technical, but I don't have to do maths for it. It's a different side of it than computers. So I sort of ended up, throwing myself more into doing the work, the schoolwork and stuff, rather than the social aspect, because it got just, too difficult. So that was easier for me, to focus on the work. So yeah, I would say, as I said before, just treat us like one of us. It might take a while to get to know us. I know it probably took a while to get to know me, to try and really, get me to open up, or get the person to open up with FX to feel comfortable with you. It might just take a bit longer, but it might work if you give it a chance. If you're patient and you're open-minded, you might have to sort of give them a bit of a prompt to talk about stuff. like the conversation starter, I said, like, what have you watched recently? I mean, I've had all sorts of conversations with people about, you know, what they've watched on some streaming platform. And I've given people, you know, recommendations as well. Just treat us like, well, any other person, really. Like you're one of us. You know, I suppose we are, I guess. And yeah, it just might take us a bit longer to do stuff, but it doesn't mean we're not going to do it. We all learn in different ways and at different rates, which we actually sometimes in work we talk about, and communicate in different ways as well. We've only had conversations recently about how to communicate with certain people, that some people prefer one method over another. You know, sometimes with the FX person, they might prefer doing what we're doing now, the face-to-face thing, or they might prefer an email or a text message or an in-person conversation. We all, I mean, you know, we all communicate differently as well. It just might take a little while. And I mean, I've had some odd reactions to, you know, me with FX, but I think that might be something that make me lack of understanding about the syndrome, lack of experience with it. And, you know, lack of knowledge and not really knowing how to, you know, deal with someone like us. I mean, it's, you know, it's genetic. You don't, it's not contagious or anything like that. In a way, you're born with it. So it's not, I mean, I can't get rid of it. I don't want to be honest. I might have one time, but I don't want to get rid of it now. I kind of like it with it, actually. In a way, it makes me maybe a bit more open, a bit more accepting, understanding, you know, of people as well. So really, I mean, it's hard to, it's easy for me to say and hard to do, but it took many years to, you know, realize all of that and to come to terms with it. But, you know, I'm glad I did in a way. Yeah. Even though it was a hard, you know, journey up until this point. And yeah, for the next 3 years, so from 2023 to 2026, the Fragile X Association of Australia, in conjunction with the Centre for Disability Studies at the University of Sydney, is conducting a study into Fragile X adults and ageing. So this will look at the impact of Fragile X on people as they age and the kinds of support they require, both from their family and from outside of their family unit. Now, for me, I am on the lived experience expert advisory panel. So we all have a connection to the syndrome in a different way. I'm the only one who actually has the syndrome that's on the panel, but the rest of the panel members have a connection somehow to the syndrome. The reason I was happy to do it is because I'm always wanting to advocate for more awareness and more education around this syndrome and get people to understand exactly what it's about and how to help us reach our potential, help us show what we can do and who we are as people. Getting out of it, it's been great hearing other people's stories about their connection with FX and their experiences as well, that they've experienced things that I have not, depending on what life has brought to them. So yeah, that's why I'm happy to be involved. It's important to get the word out, not just in the FX community, but in the wider community, that this is here and this is what it's about, and to educate and make people aware of what it is. And I think my shared experience can make it easier to talk about, maybe in a way. So I would definitely encourage you all to complete it, and any information will be invaluable to the study. So please, you know, go through it very carefully, answer the questions as best you can, give the researchers lots of information so we can get a big picture of what it's like to age with FX, depending on your connection. Yeah, it's important work. So join us in this journey to learn about what it's like to age and have FX as well.